They waited for me to forget my own name. I remembered everything. Passwords, account numbers, my lawyer's direct line. I remembered the time my son broke his wrist falling out of a tree, and how he swore he'd never climb one again. I remembered how he cried when his father died, and how I held him. And now, 50 years later, that same boy had filed a petition in court to have me declared mentally unfit. Because I forgot to return his wife's call. Because I didn't answer a group text about a barbecue. Because according to them, I was slipping. I sat on the worn cushion of my living room armchair, staring at the official envelope on the coffee table, the one that said, Rowell v. Rowell. Petition for adult guardianship. My name was listed right underneath the words, proposed ward. A cold word, ward, like someone to be locked away. I turned the envelope over slowly. Then I reached for my cup of tea and sipped it in silence, letting the heat fill the hollow that had opened in my chest. That morning, my daughter-in-law had sent me a message. Not a call, not a visit. A message. Hi, Geraldine. We've decided it's best to let the court handle your affairs. This isn't personal. Just safety. We still love you. There was no love in that. Only calculation. Only the neat closure of an accounting ledger that finally got rid of an aging name on the wrong side of the balance sheet. 3 weeks ago, they took me to lunch. My son, Alan, and his wife. I wore a powder blue cardigan and combed my hair back the way Henry always liked. They smiled and asked how I was feeling. A little tired, I said. The mornings are harder now. I thought we were having a moment of honesty, but now I see that's the moment they circled, underlined, and built their case around. They were counting on me to forget, to be just lucid enough to feel the betrayal, but too slow to respond. They didn't know I'd kept every financial document since 1981. They didn't know I still logged into my accounts weekly, not monthly, not when I remembered. Weekly. And they didn't know about the backup password book taped inside the back of my spice cabinet, behind the jar of paprika no one but me ever used. The court date was in 9 days. I had less than that to remember who I was and remind everyone else. I called Eleanor first, my lawyer of 22 years. She picked up before the second ring. You saw the notice? She asked. Her voice was sharp, but not surprised. I saw it. Do you want to fight? I want to fight quietly and win loudly. She chuckled, the way she always did when I surprised her. Then let's get to work. That afternoon, I opened the old cedar chest in my bedroom and pulled out every tax file, title deed, investment paper, and insurance record I'd kept since Henry died. I didn't look like much in that moment, just an old woman kneeling in front of a box. But if anyone had seen what I was pulling out, they'd know. This wasn't memory loss. This was memory. At dinner, I didn't answer the phone. It was Alan. Twice. No voicemail. He wanted to set the tone, make it seem like I was ignoring him. But I knew the game. In their version, I was difficult, withdrawn, maybe even paranoid. All the better to justify taking my autonomy. The next day, I visited the bank. Harriet still worked the front desk. She was younger than me by 10 years, but she looked older. When she saw me, she blinked like she wasn't sure it was really me. Mrs. Rowell, what brings you in? Trouble, I said, and smiled. I need to review every joint authorization and standing power of attorney. She frowned, but printed the documents. There's still a joint access active for your son, she said quietly. Signed in 2016, after your hip surgery. Revoke it, I said. Today. We spent 2 hours going through everything. I closed 3 dormant accounts, updated my passwords, added biometric verification, and put a block on any changes without my in-person approval. I felt exhausted afterward, not because it was hard, but because it shouldn't have been necessary. Back home, I found the envelope again. This time, I opened it fully and read every word. Alan's affidavit described me as frequently confused, forgetful, and prone to emotional instability. He mentioned that I'd recently forgotten the name of a street we used to live on. He didn't mention that I also remembered his second-grade teacher's name, the smell of Henry's aftershave, or the way Alan used to sleep with his knees pulled to his chest. The petition also cited difficulty managing technology and inability to access online banking. I smiled at that one. I opened my laptop, typed in the new password I'd set just hours before, a 12-character phrase I made from an old line of Henry's, and logged in. Everything worked. Every account was mine. They thought I'd go quietly, that I'd be grateful maybe for their help. But they'd made one mistake too many. They assumed memory fades evenly, that if I forgot a phone call, I must have forgotten who I am. But I remember. I remember everything. When Alan was 9, he asked me why I didn't cry at funerals. Because I cry before, I told him, so I can be calm when it matters. He seemed to accept that. I doubt he remembers now, but I do. I remember that I've never reacted the way people expected. That's always unsettled them. I spent the day after the bank visit going through my home like it was a crime scene, which, in a way, it was. Clues everywhere. Subtle signs of how long this had been building. On the hallway table, a flyer I didn't request. Caring transitions for seniors. I traced the return address. A service in our town that helps families gently move aging relatives into assisted care. Thelma, my daughter-in-law, had left it here a few weeks ago. I remember her voice, sweet but rehearsed. Just something to think about, Mom. These places are lovely. Like it was a birthday brochure. I'd nodded politely then, thinking she was just nervous about aging. But now I saw it for what it was. One more piece in the case they'd been building, like nesting dolls of betrayal. In the kitchen drawer, under the receipts and twist ties, I found the legal pad where I track my monthly bills. My handwriting is neat, unshaken. Water, $42. Gas, $31.67. Taxes, paid in full March 10th. I stared at the page. What about this says unfit? And then, the real break. A folded letter from last year, written by Alan, not printed, written. He'd left it after my fall in the garden. Mom, if something happens to you, we want to be prepared. It might be easier if we had a bit more formal control, just for emergencies. There it was. The first move. I'd refused then, gently, but they hadn't stopped. I sat down with my lawyer again. Eleanor had already pulled property records, power of attorney filings, and Alan's financial disclosures. She spread them out on her desk like a game board. This isn't about concern, she said. It's about control, and I think they want the house. Of course they did. I'd lived here for 47 years, paid off the mortgage with money from Henry's second patent, re-roofed it myself after the storm in '92 when the contractor tried to cheat me, raised Alan here, buried my husband's ashes in the flower bed out back. The deed had been clean and clear in my name for decades, but I'd added Alan temporarily after the hip surgery, just in case. I never removed him. That was my mistake. Now he was arguing I was no longer competent to manage my own assets. Convenient. He's hoping the court won't look too closely, Eleanor said. If they think you're soft-spoken, maybe a little tired, they'll just nod it through. We need to be sharp. Very sharp. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "What do I need to prove?" She looked me in the eye. "That you're still the woman who once ran a company, balanced 3 sets of books, and fired 2 crooked auditors in the same week." I smiled. "Then let's remind them." Back home, I called my old accountant, Charlie. He'd retired, but still answered with the same dry voice. "Rowell Residence," he said. "Or what's left of it." "Charlie," I said, "do you still have those end-of-year reports from 2015? Do you mean the ones where I told you to move your investments into municipal bonds and you said, 'I'd rather hold my own hand in a hurricane'?" I laughed. "Yes, those. Still got 'em. You want me to email them over?" "Please. And anything that shows ongoing decision-making on my part. Anything that makes me look—" I hesitated. "Dangerously competent." "Now there's the Geraldine I know," he said. The files came within the hour. I printed every page and filed them neatly in a binder, not just for court, for myself, to remind me what I've done, what I've built, who I've been all these years. Not a liability. Not a ward. A woman who once negotiated with logistics firms in 3 countries while making dinner for a sick husband and an exhausted teenage son. At some point, I stopped and went to the window. The hydrangeas in the yard were blooming, blue as always. Henry loved them. I thought about him a lot these days. What he'd say if he saw all this. He'd probably laugh, then say something cutting and wise. "If they're counting you out, Jerry, make sure the last number they hear is the one that cancels their access." I walked to the closet and pulled down the fireproof box with my original will. It was time to revisit everything. That night, Alan texted again. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in. Hope you're okay. Don't worry about court. We'll handle the hard stuff." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. They'd built a plan around my silence, around my perceived weakness, around a woman they thought was already halfway gone. But I was still here, still standing, and I wasn't done yet. When I first met Eleanor, she was 29, nervous, and convinced no client would take her seriously. I took one look at her and said, "You wear better shoes than I ever did, and you don't blink when someone tries to interrupt you. That's enough." She handled the sale of my company, the dispute over Henry's second patent, and my property tax appeal in 2012. She knew where every skeleton was buried, including the ones I'd buried on purpose. "Your son's lawyer submitted his own list of concerns," she told me now, scanning the packet in front of her. "He claims you've missed payments, forgotten appointments, confused relatives' names. He included a statement from your daughter-in-law." "Thelma," I said flatly. "Of course. She says you thought your grandson was in college when he'd already graduated, that you once left the stove on overnight, that you called her by the wrong name at Thanksgiving." I laughed. "I called her Deborah. That was intentional." Eleanor didn't smile. She didn't need to. "It's not strong enough to win, but it's enough to muddy the water, and that's their goal. Get the judge to question you, even a little." I pressed my fingers together on the table. "So they're hoping I'll prove them right by being confused in court, or intimidated, or emotional, anything but clear." "I see." I stood up. "Then I won't be any of those things." That week, I made it my business to prepare like I was going back to work. I woke at 6 a.m., made tea, and reviewed a new set of documents each day. Bank statements, investment summaries, trust agreements. I practiced reading them aloud, not because I couldn't, but because I wanted to sound not only competent, but sharp. Sharp like I'd always been. I met with a neurologist Eleanor recommended. Dr. Benfield, a woman in her 50s with clear eyes and no time for patronizing language. She ran a full cognitive evaluation. Memory tests, reaction time, sequencing, logic. "Ms. Rowell," she said after, tapping the edge of her tablet, "your results are not only well within normal range, they're better than some of the med students I test." "Can I get that in writing?" She smiled. "Already emailed." At home, I looked around my living room differently. For the first time, I noticed what it had become: a shrine to compromise. There were framed photos of Alan's family on every shelf, none of them recent. The last time they took one with me in it was 3 years ago, at Easter, when I offered to pay for the meal. I remember Thelma's forced smile, the way Alan kept checking his phone. After dessert, they left early. Work in the morning. I removed 3 of the photos, packed them in a box. Then I opened the old cabinet in the corner, the one I hadn't touched in years. Inside, everything smelled of cedar and old receipts. Tucked in the back was a smaller box, metal, heavy. Henry's military keepsakes, medals, discharge papers, a photograph of him in uniform, smiling awkwardly. I ran a hand over the top. He would have hated this. The idea of our own child maneuvering behind our backs, treating me like an expired will waiting to be opened. But he also would have told me not to cry over it. "Let them make their play," he would say. "Then make yours." I did cry, a little. Quietly. Then I locked the cabinet again. That night, I received another message, this time from someone I didn't expect. "Hi, Grandma. I don't know what's going on, but I heard there's some legal thing. Just want you to know I love you. Oliver." Oliver? My grandson. The one Alan always said needed structure, as if affection was a kind of indulgence. Oliver had been the quiet one, the one who used to sit beside me during storms and read while I knit. We hadn't spoken in months, but somehow he'd heard. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm okay. I'm just remembering who I am." No one else reached out that week. The house was silent, but my mind was loud. Organizing, reviewing, refining. I filled a binder with everything Eleanor said I might need in court. Labeled it with tape. Rowell Defense, Confidential. I put a second binder together, too. One for what came after. My own plan. Not just to fight this attempt, but to reclaim what had been slowly, carefully taken from me over the years, with polite smiles and subtle suggestions. Eleanor called me the day before the hearing. "You ready?" "Yes." "Good. Because they'll be expecting the version of you that sits back and lets things happen. Then they'll be disappointed. I hope they're devastated." I laughed. "You always were dramatic." She paused. "You know this won't fix everything, right? They'll be furious." "I'm not fixing them," I said. "I'm fixing me." That night, I wrote a letter. I didn't know if I'd give it to Alan, but I needed to write it anyway. It began with, "You weren't raised to be cruel, but you learned to be cold. I hope one day you feel it, the chill of being treated like a burden. And I hope it changes you." I didn't sign it. I left it in the drawer, next to the insurance papers. The next morning, I woke early, bathed, dressed in my navy suit, and made my bed like it was the last act of dignity in a world that had tried to take it. In the mirror, I didn't see an old woman. I saw a ledger being balanced, a scale righting itself. Let them say what they will. Tomorrow I speak. In the end, It wasn't memory that nearly failed me. It was my body. The morning of the hearing, my knees ached so fiercely I had to sit down 3 separate times before I got my stockings on. My hands shook when I tried to fasten the necklace Henry gave me in '83. I stood in the bathroom mirror, holding the clasp with one hand and muttering, "Come on, old girl, not today." It caught, finally, like even the necklace knew this was not a day for faltering. I didn't tell Eleanor how bad the stiffness had been. She'd have worried. Instead, I arrived at her office 20 minutes before court in the same charcoal gray coat I wore to Henry's memorial service. Not out of mourning, but because it was the sharpest garment I owned, and today demanded edges. Eleanor looked up as I stepped in. "You look like a woman about to argue with God," she said. "Only if he tries to co-sign with my son," I replied. She grinned, handed me a coffee, and reviewed the schedule. "They're not bringing in doctors, just statements. They're hoping your behavior today will do the work for them." "So let's behave like fire," I said. We walked into the courthouse together. Eleanor in a navy pantsuit, me in my morning coat armor. Alan and Thelma were already seated. Thelma wore cream like it was a wedding. Alan didn't look up until we were almost past him. When he saw me, he flinched. He wasn't expecting the coat. He wasn't expecting me to look so composed. That was the first crack. The judge, a woman named Rafferty, was in her early 60s. Sharp eyes, no patience for dramatics. She reviewed the petition out loud, flipping through the documents. Alan's lawyer, a slick man with a thinning ponytail and a permanent smirk, did most of the talking. "Your Honor, we present today a concern for Mrs. Rowell's well-being, not as an attack, but as a safeguard. Her family has observed increasing confusion, missed communications, and troubling lapses in financial management. The goal is not to punish, but to support." Eleanor rose when it was our turn. "Mrs. Rowell is here to speak for herself. She's prepared documents, testimony, and medical evaluations." Judge Rafferty nodded. "We'll begin with her then. Mrs. Rowell?" I stood, and that's when the second crack happened. Because I didn't shuffle, I didn't stumble. I walked to the stand with slow, deliberate dignity, like someone approaching her own throne. When I sat, I didn't fumble with my purse or squint at the light. I folded my hands and looked directly at the judge. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Geraldine Rowell. I am 74 years old. I live at 261 Bramble Avenue in the house I paid off in 1998. I am the widow of Henry Rowell and the mother of Alan Rowell. I am not confused. I am not unwell. I am not in need of protection." Judge Rafferty nodded slightly. "Go on." "I have been managing my financial affairs for over 50 years. I ran a company for 23 of them. I've paid my bills on time, maintained investments, and filed taxes without error. I have no outstanding debts. I have no documented incidents of harm to myself or others. My medical evaluation," I held up the report, "is in your packet under Exhibit 4. I paused, then added, "And I know exactly who I am, and exactly who is trying to take that away from me." The room was silent. Alan shifted in his chair. "I forgot my grandson had graduated," I said, turning to the judge. "Because I wasn't invited to the ceremony. I called my daughter-in-law Deborah, because that's the name of the woman who actually visits me on Sundays. The woman who brings jam and asks how I'm feeling, not the one who asks if I've considered selling my house." Alan stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to—" "Sit down," Judge Rafferty said. He sat. I opened the binder I'd brought. "Here are my bank records, password changes, login history, all within the last 30 days, all managed by me, not by my son, not by his wife. I have revoked his power of attorney. I have updated my legal will, and I am placing all my assets into an irrevocable trust to be managed by someone who has never once treated me like an obstacle. I didn't name her. Not yet. The judge looked at me carefully. Do you know why your family says they filed this petition? Because they thought I'd forget the password. That got her attention. They waited for me to lose track of time, to miss a few more birthdays, to mistake a name or an appointment, and then they'd say, "See? She's slipping." But I wasn't slipping. I was tired of being useful only when it's convenient, tired of paying for dinners I'm not invited to, tired of being treated like a walking account balance. I closed the binder. I'm not confused, Your Honor. I'm just done pretending not to notice. Judge Rafferty looked at Eleanor, then back at me. Thank you, Mrs. Rowell. You may return to your seat. I nodded, walked back, sat. The third crack came then, because Alan didn't look at me. Couldn't. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Thelma whispered something, and he brushed her off. The show was over, and they knew it. When the judge ruled, it was swift. Petition denied. Mrs. Rowell retains full legal authority over her affairs. This court sees no credible evidence of diminished capacity. Case dismissed. I didn't smile. Not yet. I waited until we were out on the courthouse steps, until Eleanor exhaled, until the autumn wind caught the edge of my coat. Then I allowed myself to breathe. He showed up that evening. No call, no message, just the sound of tires on the gravel outside, and then the doorbell. One short ring, like he still believed he had the right to stand on that porch without warning. I opened the door without a word. Alan looked older than he had that morning. His tie was gone, shirt wrinkled at the collar. He held a white paper bag in one hand. I brought dinner, he said. I stepped aside. Not out of invitation, just enough to let him know that if he wanted to speak, he'd have to do it on my ground. He followed me into the kitchen, put the bag on the counter like it meant something, like it could mean something again. I thought maybe we could just talk, he said. I poured 2 cups of tea, because habits die slowly, and I wasn't ready to be cruel. One of them I said in front of him. The other I held. So talk, I said. He looked around the room like it had changed since his last visit. It hadn't. Same table, same chipped sugar bowl, same smell of lavender from the soap I've used since before he was born. I want to apologize, he began, but I raised my hand. No rehearsals, Alan. If you came here to say sorry, say it like a man. Not like a man trying to control the fallout. He swallowed hard. We were worried, that's all. You've been more distant. I've been excluded, I corrected him. Not distant. Distant implies choice. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the teacup. And Thelma? I asked. She thought... He trailed off. She wanted to make sure we were protected. From me? From being caught off guard, he mumbled. I sat down across from him. You asked a court to take my name off my own accounts, Alan. You prepared documents months in advance. You sent letters behind my back. That's not protection, that's strategy. He said nothing. I waited. I guess we thought if we waited long enough, you'd start forgetting things, that it would feel natural, he admitted finally. There it was. The truth, laid out like a crumpled napkin on the table, ugly in its ordinariness. I leaned back. You were counting on me to lose myself, not overnight, not suddenly, just little by little, until one day I wouldn't notice the papers on the desk or the quiet transfer of authority, until I became grateful. He nodded. A small, broken gesture. I'm not grateful, I said gently. I'm awake. The silence between us stretched thin. I let it hold. Then he tried again. Maybe we can just move forward, he offered. Start fresh. I looked at him, at the fine lines around his mouth, the weary slump of his shoulders. My son, once a boy with dirt on his knees and mismatched socks, now a man who tried to steal his own mother's voice. No, Alan, I said. We don't get to move forward just because your plan didn't work. Moving forward requires trust. And you burned that bridge, not with fire, but with paper and ink and quiet decisions. He blinked fast. So what now? Now, I said, standing. You go home. You think about the cost of what you tried to take. Not just the house, not the accounts, me. He didn't argue, just rose, hesitated as if he might say more, then left. I watched him through the window, walking back to his car with the paper bag still in his hand. The meal untouched, like the apology it carried. The driveway emptied, the kitchen filled with quiet again. I finished my tea. Then I poured his down the drain. The next morning, I took out the key I hadn't used in almost 6 years. It was labeled in Henry's handwriting. Office, back. I held it for a long time, then slipped it into my coat pocket and locked the house behind me. The drive across town felt longer than I remembered. The roads had changed. New buildings, new signs. The kind of quiet gentrification that erases everything but the sidewalks. Still, when I turned down Briar Street and saw the faded red brick building that used to house Rowell Packaging Solutions, something in my chest tightened like a knot finally remembered. I parked around the corner, walked up slowly. The company had been sold to a larger firm after Henry died. Part of the exit plan I designed myself. I'd kept a minority share, just enough to see the quarterly statements, just enough to know the bones of the place hadn't been stripped. Inside, the front desk looked different, brighter, sleeker. But the woman behind it smiled the way people used to smile when they knew your name meant something. "Can I help you?" she asked politely. "I'm here to see Davis Reynolds," I said. "Tell him Geraldine Rowell stopped by." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't question it. 5 minutes later, Davis, now president, once a junior logistics manager fresh out of college, walked into the lobby with disbelief written all over his face. "Mrs. Rowell? Don't look so shocked, Davis. I'm not a ghost." He laughed, then hugged me. Awkward at first, but warm. "My God, it's been too long," I said. "Do you have 15 minutes? For you? An hour?" He led me to the conference room, smaller than I remembered, but clean, professional. His assistant brought us tea, and I smiled at the familiar ritual. "I've read the quarterly reports," I said, cutting through the nostalgia. "You've streamlined production, expanded distribution west. Good moves." Davis looked sheepish. "Most of that came from your old notes. We still use the binder you left." "I know. I designed it so no one could mess it up." We both smiled. "I'm not here for compliments," I continued. "I'm here because I want to feel the floor under me again. I want to remember what I built, and I want a favor." He sat up straighter. "Anything. I need access to my old records. The purchase history of the property on Bramble Avenue, the equipment transfers. I need to prove beyond legal, beyond memory, that everything I've built was mine. Not my son's, not my family's, not inherited or gifted. Earned. Documented. Davis didn't hesitate. I'll have them by Monday. I nodded. Good. I'll also need a letter, on letterhead, outlining my continued advisory role, even if informal. They tried to paint me as retired, disengaged. That needs correcting. He blinked. You want a record of your relevance? I smiled. No, I want a record of my authority. We talked another hour. He offered lunch. I declined. Too much warmth would weaken the clarity I'd fought to build. Before I left, I walked through the back hall, the old operations corridor. The door to the storage room was open. Inside, one of the new hires was unpacking a shipment. She looked up, startled. Sorry, she said. Did you need something? No, I replied softly. Just checking the weight of the air. She didn't understand. That was fine. Not everything was for explaining. On the drive home, I passed the strip mall where Alan once worked summers during college. Bagging groceries, saving for books. He used to come home sweaty and proud. I remembered the day he told me he didn't want that kind of life. I hadn't argued. I just said, then build something better. Funny how he forgot that lesson when it came to me. Back home, I made soup. Nothing fancy. Just something warm. I sat at the table with my own stack of binders and added Davis's name to the witness list. I underlined property origin, title transfer history, and post-retirement activity. I wasn't rebuilding a case. I was rebuilding a spine. When the phone rang that evening, I almost didn't answer. But the name on the screen wasn't Alan. It was Lydia, my oldest friend, my compass when I needed grounding. Jerry, she said, I heard about the hearing. I've been trying to call. I've been trying to remember who I am, I said. And did you? Yes. Good, she said. Then let's not waste it. We talked for an hour, laughed, cried a little, remembered who we were before we became other people's background characters. When the call ended, I sat for a while in the dark kitchen, hands wrapped around a cooling mug. I wasn't anyone's ward. I wasn't a burden or a legacy to be managed. I was a woman who'd built a business, buried a husband, raised a child, and made 1,000 right decisions without applause. And I was just getting started. The notice came on a Thursday afternoon, tucked among the junk mail and credit card offers. Hearing rescheduled. Due to court backlog, your next appearance is postponed by 14 days. At first, I sat on the porch steps just holding it. Not in relief, but in readiness. 2 weeks wasn't a delay. It was a window, a gift, and I had no intention of wasting it. By the following morning, I was on the phone with Eleanor, who answered with her usual clipped focus. Good, she said when I read her the notice. Use the time. Build weight. We already won the round. Let's win the silence that comes after. I knew exactly where to start. There was a moment last month, before all this began to unspool, when Thelma had stopped by unannounced. She'd brought coffee, which she never does unless she wants something. I remember how she lingered by the bookshelf, looking at the framed deed to the house, the one Henry had mounted in 2003, right after our final loan payment. You know, she said idly, you might want to think about putting this place into a trust, just to make things easier, in case, decisions need to be made. I smiled then, but it wasn't kind. Easier for whom? She laughed it off, but her eyes never left that frame. That conversation had stuck with me. Not just the content, the tone, the strategy, the assumption that I wouldn't remember, or that if I did, I wouldn't act. But I had acted. The next day, I pulled out the tiny voice recorder Eleanor had once gifted me. More of a joke than a tool, but it turned out to be both. It had captured that entire exchange. I'd recorded it without thought, a habit from years in business. Now it would serve a higher purpose. I called Eleanor. I have something, a recording. Nothing illegal, just revealing. You'll need a transcript and a dated file log, she said. And we'll get it entered as context, not evidence. Understood. That same afternoon, I called Richard, my banker, the one who always greeted me like a retired CEO instead of someone's forgotten mother. Richard, I said, I'm ready to finish what we started. You want to formalize the trust? Yes. Everything except a small personal account. And I want full discretionary powers transferred to the beneficiary. Name? Catherine Rowell. There was a pause. Then, the granddaughter. The only one who never asked me for anything, I said. Only ever showed up to say hello. We worked through the paperwork. I signed the first set the same day and scheduled a notarized delivery for the rest. No one would be able to touch my assets without going through the fortress I had just built. That night, Catherine called. Not because of the trust. She didn't know yet. But just because. Grandma, she said, I made your cinnamon cookies today, and they turned out awful. Please tell me what I did wrong. You used margarine, didn't you? She laughed. How did you know? You think I'd write a recipe that works with margarine? We talked for 20 minutes. She told me about her new job, a gallery assistant, small hours, low pay, lots of promise, and hope. That thing I thought had left this family long ago. Before hanging up, she said, By the way, Dad's been acting weird, like trying to get in touch with me more than usual. I don't know what's going on, but something feels off. Just be yourself, I told her. That's all I need from you. I didn't say more. She'd find out soon enough. The rest of the week, I continued preparing. I called old colleagues, collected letters of support, including one from a former city commissioner who still remembered how I fought for local manufacturing contracts in the 90s. You never missed a meeting, she wrote, even with a sick husband and a broken ankle. I included it in the folder labeled Character, Competence, Continuity. 3 days before the rescheduled hearing, I went to the garden, not for symbolism, but to trim the hydrangeas. Henry's plot sat undisturbed, just as he liked it. No plaques, no benches, just soft earth and a stone with his initials and nothing more. I'm almost done, I whispered. Then I'll rest too. When I stood, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. But I didn't feel tired. I felt precise, like everything was finally where it belonged. That night, I made my favorite dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a proper gravy. Not because anyone was coming, but because I wanted to remember what it was like to eat well and alone, not in loneliness, but in freedom. As I cleared the dishes, I checked my list one last time. Bank, secured, property, protected, legal standing, solidified, intent, documented. The only thing left was the hearing. Let them come. I'd already won. Catherine showed up on Sunday without warning, which was how I always preferred visitors, unscripted, unafraid. She brought a bag of groceries she didn't need to buy and 2 sleeves of cookies that looked like they came from a gas station. I remembered you hate being asked if you need anything, she said as she set them on the counter. So I brought what you don't need. I smiled. You've always had better instincts than the rest of them. We sat at the kitchen table, the light from the window warming the wood between us. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if I was managing. She just waited, like she knew I had something to say, and was giving me the space to decide when. So I did. "I've set up a trust," I said plainly, "for everything I own." Her eyes widened slightly. "Okay. You're the beneficiary, not just in name. You'll have access. Not now, not all at once, but eventually. The house, the accounts, the patents, the investment returns. It's all in there." "Grandma," she started, hands lifting from the table. I mean, are you sure?" "I've never been more sure." She sat back, eyes searching mine. "Why me?" I took a slow sip of tea before answering. "Because you didn't ask. Because you never made me feel like a vault that hadn't been cracked open yet. Because when you come here, you sit down like a granddaughter, not a polite solicitor waiting for the reading of a will." She blinked, then laughed softly. "That's probably the nicest thing anyone said to me. It should be the most honest." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "What's really going on, Grandma? Dad won't stop texting me. Thelma even called, and she never calls. They keep saying we should stick together as a family, that we shouldn't let outside voices influence us, and I don't know what they mean, but I can guess." "They tried to take everything," I said. "Not violently, not loudly, just carefully. They filed for guardianship, wanted control, over the house, the money, me." Her hands went still. "Why?" she asked. "Because I'm 74 and quiet. Because I didn't answer 2 calls. Because they thought that meant I was fading. And because they assumed I wouldn't fight." "But you did." "I am." I handed her a folder. Inside, the bank documents, the trust registration, the notarized signature forms. "If anything happens to me," I said, "you call Eleanor Reed. She'll walk you through everything. But more importantly, you don't let anyone, not Alan, not Thelma, not anyone with your last name or mine, tell you who you are or what you owe them." She looked down at the papers, hands trembling a little. "Grandma," she whispered, "this is too much." "No," I said. "Too much is what they asked of me, year after year, while telling me I was lucky just to be included. This is balance." She nodded slowly, then reached across the table and took my hand. "I won't let them near it. I promise." "I know," I said. "And you won't let it change you. Not a chance." We sat like that for a long time. 2 women with the same bone structure and the same hard-earned silences. She reminded me of myself at 25, not in the way she dressed or spoke, but in the way she saw through people without needing to be cruel. I'd lost that somewhere along the way, or maybe I'd buried it under decades of being useful. Now I was digging it back up and handing it to someone who'd know what to do with it. As she got up to leave, she paused at the door. "If they come for you again—" "They won't," I said. "But if they try, I'll be ready." She smiled. "Can I bring you something next time?" "No." "Good," she said. "I will anyway." After she left, I sat back down, folded the tablecloth slowly, and placed the folder in the drawer near the sink. Not hidden, just near. Like something you might reach for when your hands need something solid. I wasn't handing over power, I was restoring a legacy, not one of money, but of clarity and quiet strength. I woke before dawn the day before the hearing, not because of fear or pain or even habit, just readiness, like something inside me had clicked into place and there was nothing left to wait for. The house was still. Even the floorboards, usually groaning their age in the mornings, stayed quiet. I moved through the rooms slowly, not out of weakness, but out of reverence. This was the last full day I'd live with uncertainty. After tomorrow, everything would either be mine again, fully, or I'd know where I stood for good. I made tea but didn't drink it. Instead, I laid out every document I'd spent the last month assembling: the bank records, the notarized trust, the transcript of Thelma's conversation, the character letters, the medical evaluations, the property history. I spread them across the dining table like pieces of a mosaic. My life, in print. I read each one aloud. Then I logged into my bank account. Typed the password carefully, the new one I created 2 weeks ago. Henry's, hand 74. It worked. Instant access. Balances. History. Transaction logs. I navigated it without pause. Clicked through every tab. Practiced downloading PDFs, exporting spreadsheets, taking screenshots. Not because I'd need to do it in court, Eleanor would handle that, but because I wanted it to be muscle memory. I wanted them to see, in that courtroom, that nothing about me was fading. At 10:15 a.m., I met with the notary at the bank. Richard, as promised, had prepared everything for the final asset instructions: how the trust should function if I became incapacitated, what would trigger a full transfer to Catherine, how to prevent emergency access from being granted to other family members, no matter how concerned they claimed to be. The notary, a small woman with tired eyes and sharp fingers, watched me sign the last form, then said quietly, "I wish more people did this before things got complicated." "I wish fewer people made things complicated in the first place," I replied. By noon, it was done. I went home, reheated a bowl of soup from 2 nights ago, and ate slowly. I didn't check my phone, though I could see it flashing silently on the counter. I already knew who it was. Alan had called 3 times the night before. No voicemails. Just a blank insistence. After lunch, I went upstairs and opened the cedar trunk in the hallway. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was the dress I wore to Henry's retirement dinner. A simple navy piece with a high collar and fitted sleeves. I'd kept it not out of sentiment, but out of principle. Some clothes carry more than fabric. They carry proof. I tried it on. It still fit. In the mirror, I didn't see an old woman preparing for battle. I saw a woman returning to a conversation that should have ended a long time ago. One that said, "You owe us. You belong to us. Your life is just the remainder of what we let you keep." Not anymore. I pulled out the jewelry box next. Nothing flashy. Just a single silver pin Henry gave me when our company passed $1 million in revenue. A little bird in flight. I pinned it to the collar. Not for show, for memory. At 4 p.m., I printed a fresh copy of my prepared remarks. 2 pages. Simple language. Nothing defensive. Just fact after fact after fact. Then I sat at the window and watched the street. It was the same one I'd lived on since 1976. Same trees, same sag in the curb outside the neighbor's driveway, same rhythm. But I wasn't the same. By sunset, I'd folded everything neatly into the navy leather folder Eleanor gave me years ago, the one I never used until now. I placed it on the chair beside my bed. My shoes under it. No last-minute decisions. Before going to sleep, I looked in the mirror one last time. Not to check anything, just to witness myself. I saw a woman who'd been underestimated by her own family, her own son. A woman who'd been told, quietly, to shrink, to soften, to surrender. But I had not softened. I had sharpened. Tomorrow, I would show them what that looked like, and I would not flinch. The courthouse smelled of dust and air conditioning. That particular chill that doesn't belong to the weather, but to buildings where decisions are made. It settles on your skin like quiet judgment. I walked through the metal detector without a word. Eleanor met me just past security, dressed in black and gray, sharp, calm, unbothered. "They're already here," she said. "Good," I replied. "Let them wait." The courtroom was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was just more present this time. The last hearing had been a blur of betrayal and noise. This one felt precise, focused, like a scalpel about to separate truth from story. Alan sat with Thelma 2 rows ahead, whispering in hushed tones that weren't as discreet as they thought. He looked rested, confident. Not because of facts, but because he thought he'd worn me down. Worn time down. That's how these things work. Not with one blow, but with a slow erosion of presence, dignity, certainty. They'd built a case on the idea that I was too tired to show up twice. But here I was. Same coat, same posture, same face. Just a different kind of stillness. The judge entered at 9:03 a.m. Same woman. Same glasses pushed to the tip of her nose. She nodded once and said, "Let's proceed." Alan's lawyer rose first. He wore the same smug expression as before, but a bit tighter this time, like he knew the thread was fraying. "Your Honor," he began, "we appreciate the court's time and recognize the seriousness of this matter. We are not here to diminish Mrs. Rowell's personhood or history. Quite the opposite. We are here out of love and concern, rooted in observable changes, cognitive decline, difficulty managing technology, confusion during routine family interactions. These are not accusations. They are patterns." He gestured gently, as if this were a family dinner and not a legal proceeding. "There is no shame in aging," he added, turning toward the judge with an expression carefully crafted to evoke empathy. "But there is danger in ignoring it." I watched Alan out of the corner of my eye. He wasn't even pretending to look sad. His expression was clean, professional, like a man reviewing quarterly earnings instead of trying to dismantle the autonomy of the woman who bore him. The lawyer continued. "My client has documented instances of missed appointments, forgotten conversations, and significant confusion over financial matters, all supported by affidavit. Furthermore, it is the family's understanding that Mrs. Rowell has made abrupt changes to her estate planning without consultation or input, which we believe further supports our concern." He stepped aside. That was their opening. Polished, cool, false in the way only something practiced too many times can be. Eleanor rose. "No one here denies that Mrs. Rowell is 74, she said calmly. "What we deny is the myth that age equals incompetence, that quiet means confusion, and that independence is something you have to re-earn every year after retirement." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace. She just laid her hand flat on the table. "We will present documented proof that Mrs. Rowell remains fully capable of managing her affairs. We will demonstrate that she has been targeted, not supported by her family. And we will show that this proceeding is not about safety, but about control." The judge nodded. "Understood. Let's begin with statements." And just like that, the process was set into motion. They brought up witnesses first. A neighbor who claimed I sometimes forgot to take my mail in. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 4 years who said I seemed quieter than I used to be. They tried to frame silence as evidence, grief as confusion, privacy as decline, but I sat there, unmoved. Document folder in my lap, spine straight, no trembling, because I wasn't there to react. I was there to end it. When the court broke for recess, Alan turned once, as if expecting me to meet his eyes. I didn't. Not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to look for. This wasn't his courtroom anymore. It was mine now. When the judge called my name, the room seemed to contract, not into silence, but into a kind of listening, the type that doesn't wait for sound, only meaning. I stood, picked up the leather folder, and walked forward. My shoes didn't echo. They landed, steady, on the tile floor, like a metronome counting down the seconds until clarity. I took my seat. Judge Rafferty gave me a nod. "Whenever you're ready, Mrs. Rowell." I opened the folder, slowly, not for effect, but for order. "My name," I began, "is Geraldine Ruth Rowell. I was born in 1949. I've owned my home for 47 years. I co-founded a packaging business with my husband, Henry Rowell, in 1972. We sold it in 2004, and I retained a minority share. I still receive quarterly statements and remain listed as an informal advisor." I looked at the judge. "That part matters." She nodded. "Go on." 2 months ago, my son and his wife filed a petition to assume control of my finances, health care, and legal decisions. This petition was based on what they called a pattern of confusion and withdrawal. What they failed to include were the patterns I created, the ones that made them possible. I lifted the first document. This is a notarized record of my bank transactions. Passwords changed within the past 30 days, login timestamps, 2-factor authentications, all completed by me. No proxies, no assistants. Eleanor stood and approached the bench, offering copies to the judge and opposing counsel. I continued. "This is a transcript of a conversation recorded in my home. My daughter-in-law, Thelma, suggested, unprompted, that I prepare to give up control of my estate. She called it a gentle transition. I call it the beginning of a quiet erasure." Another document passed forward. "This," I said, lifting the next page, "is a cognitive evaluation conducted by Dr. Benfield, a board-certified neurologist with no affiliation to me, my family, or this case. Her conclusion? No evidence of impairment." I placed my hands flat on the table. Let the silence sit. Then I reached into my bag and removed my laptop. I opened it, turned it to face the judge, and said, "They claimed I could no longer manage online banking, that I was locked out, that I was confused by technology." I typed the password. 12 characters. No hesitation. Henry's, hands 74. The screen opened instantly. My name, my accounts, every dollar, every file, exactly where I left it. The courtroom was silent. I clicked through 3 tabs, showed the login timestamp, then closed the lid gently. "I am not lost," I said quietly. "I am not confused. I am not declining. I am not absent. I am here. Fully." Judge Rafferty's face remained still, but something behind her eyes shifted. The difference between listening and believing. I added one more thing. "I have created an irrevocable trust. Everything I own, my property, assets, intellectual property, has been transferred to it. The beneficiary is Catherine Rowell, my granddaughter, the only member of my family who has not treated me like a fading page in a closing book." Eleanor distributed the notarized trust documents. Everything stamped. Everything clean. "I did not do this out of bitterness," I said. "I did it because no woman should have to earn the right to remain herself. Not in her own home. Not in her own name. Not in front of a court. Against her own blood." I folded my hands again. No shaking. No emotion I hadn't chosen. "I'm done," I said. The judge didn't speak right away. When she did, her voice was quiet, measured. Thank you, Mrs. Rowell. I returned to my seat. Alan was looking at the floor now. Thelma was still, not pale, not flushed, just frozen. Like people do when the narrative breaks in two and you realize you're not the author. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I had just logged in, not to a bank account, to myself. The judge asked for a short recess before delivering her ruling. As the room emptied, I stayed in my seat. Not out of defiance, just clarity. I had said everything I needed to say. Anything more would only be noise. Eleanor leaned in. You did exactly what needed doing. I didn't respond. I just watched Alan as he stood a few feet away, shifting his weight, his hands in his pockets like a boy who'd thrown a rock through a window and didn't want to look at the glass. Thelma sat beside him, arms crossed tightly across her stomach. She wasn't whispering now. Her silence was louder than anything she'd said in the petition. I could have pitied them, but I didn't. Not because I hated them, but because pity implies a kind of innocence, and that wasn't what this was. This was calculation, exposed, and now it was time for the count. When Judge Rafferty returned, the room hushed almost immediately. She took her seat slowly, glasses in hand. No drama, just the quiet weight of consequence. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, she began, and I want to state for the record that this court takes matters of guardianship very seriously. They are not tools to be wielded out of discomfort, misunderstanding, or impatience. They are legal interventions, used only when there is genuine incapacity, and even then, with caution. She looked at Alan, then at Thelma. What I have seen here today is not evidence of incapacity, but of independence. Not a woman losing her way, but one fighting to protect the road she's already walked, and the one ahead of her. She turned to me, just briefly. Mrs. Rowell, you are not required to prove your worth to your family, but you have done so here, and more. She turned back to the court. The petition is denied, permanently. Mrs. Rowell retains full legal and financial autonomy. The court finds no basis for further inquiry. She closed the file, then added, almost as an afterthought, and if this matter is raised again without substantial and documented new evidence, the court will consider sanctions. Alan flinched. Thelma's mouth tightened. I stood slowly. No smile, no sigh. Just a gentle push back of the chair and a straightening of the spine that had held too much for too long. The bailiff opened the door. Eleanor touched my arm once, briefly, not in victory, but in respect. We walked out together. In the hallway, press of footsteps and murmurs blurred into nothing. I could hear Eleanor talking, saying something about paperwork and next steps, but her voice was water against stone. I kept walking until we reached the outside steps. Sunlight, crisp air, the kind that doesn't ask questions, the kind that just is. Behind us, the doors opened again. I didn't turn around. Mom, Alan called. I stopped, but didn't face him. He came closer, not too close. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I know, I said. You meant for it to go quietly. A long pause, then softer. What now? I turned then, looked him full in the face, the one I'd kissed after fevers, the one I'd defended on playgrounds, the one that now mirrored a stranger more than a son. Now you go home, I said, and think about who taught you that love meant ownership and why you listened. He said nothing. Thelma didn't speak at all. I walked away first. Not because I wanted to, but because I had earned the right to. Eleanor joined me at the curb. You need a ride? No, I said. I need to walk a little. She nodded. Call me if you need anything. I won't, I replied. But thank you. She didn't argue. I walked 3 blocks before I finally slowed. The city looked the same, but it felt different. Like I'd been gone a long time and returned to find the air rearranged. At the next bench, I sat. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean. Like someone who had finally, after years of polite silence, said the thing that needed saying. Not with venom, not with drama, just with truth. Plain, firm, unapologetic. The kind of truth that doesn't ask for applause. Just space. I watched a bird hop across the sidewalk. It wasn't in a hurry. Neither was I. The house was quieter than I remembered. Not empty, just honest. For the first time in years, it didn't echo with the weight of waiting. No distant expectations. No calls that never came. No strained visits filled with sideways glances and unfinished sentences. Just stillness. A week had passed since the hearing. No one from the family had contacted me. Not Alan, not Thelma, not even to protest the judge's decision. The silence wasn't cruel. It was cowardly. But it was also a gift. In their absence, I had room to hear something else. Myself. I began the week by doing what I used to do every January, but hadn't done in some time. I cleaned out the study. Not for show, not to impress, not because someone might be stopping by, but because I needed to clear the debris of things long overdue for letting go. The first drawer was full of Henry's letters. Handwritten, almost all from our early years. Some short, some clumsy, all of them real. One read simply, "Jerry, if I die first, don't shrink. Expand. Grow into the space I leave behind." I hadn't remembered that one. But reading it now, it didn't feel like news. It felt like instruction. I placed the letter in a wooden frame I hadn't used since Catherine was a child. Set it on the windowsill. The second drawer was full of receipts, invoices, warranties, the practical residue of a long, responsible life. I sorted them into piles, kept the few I needed for tax season, and shredded the rest. With every page that passed through the blades, I felt lighter. Less like someone holding on, more like someone choosing what to carry. On Wednesday, I called the bank and confirmed the trust's digital certificate had been finalized. Richard's assistant congratulated me, politely, without much fanfare. I liked that. I didn't want ceremony. I wanted closure. Later that day, I wrote a new personal will. Not because it was legally required anymore, but because I wanted my words written down. Not my assets, just my wishes. To Catherine. The house, yes, but also the garden, and the bird feeder, and the letter I framed by the window. To Eleanor, the leather folder, and whatever remains in the account I left untouched. For her next client who can't afford the first retainer. To Alan, nothing material. Just the space between these lines, where I hope one day he reads more than silence. I signed it, dated it, sealed it in an envelope, placed it in the drawer beneath the framed letter. On Thursday, Catherine texted, "Can I come by Sunday? Just to sit. I'll bring tea." "Yes," I replied. "Bring whatever kind you like. But don't apologize if it's weak." "I never do," she wrote back. The rest of the day passed without much incident. I cooked, I ironed, I repaired a button on a sweater I hadn't worn in years. Not because I planned to wear it now, but because mending something with your own hands still matters. That evening, I took a walk to the edge of the neighborhood, where the sidewalk ends and the woods begin. I stood there for a while, watching the wind move through the trees. No thoughts. Just breath, just presence. Coming back, I saw the light on in the living room. Warm, steady, no flickering. No doubt. Just home. I stepped inside, took off my coat and laid it over the chair by the door. Not for anyone. Not to show I'd been out. Just to remind myself I had returned. Not from an errand. From a long forgetting. And I hadn't come back smaller. I had come back whole. She arrived just before noon, her coat too thin for the weather, her cheeks flushed from the walk. I opened the door before she knocked. "You always do that," Catherine said, smiling. "Like you hear my feet before I even turn the corner." "I hear intention," I said. "Footsteps are just confirmation." She handed me the tea. 2 brown paper bags with mismatched boxes inside. "I didn't know what mood you'd be in," she said, "so I brought options." We didn't hug. We didn't need to. Some people press their presence on you with noise. Others, like her, just settle into the room like warmth returning to your hands. We sat in the kitchen. I boiled the kettle. She unpacked the tea. Neither of us said anything meaningful for the first 10 minutes. We didn't need to. Words would come later, in their own time. She chose lavender and chamomile. I took plain black. "I forgot how much I love the sound of this house," she said quietly. "The way it clicks and settles." "It breathes," I replied. She nodded. After tea, we walked the garden. Not much was blooming. Early March still had its grip on the soil. But the ground was softening. The tips of tulips had started to nudge upward through the mulch. I pointed them out, not as a lesson, but as an invitation. Catherine crouched beside one. "It's always these," she said. "First to come up. First to bend in the wind." "They bend," I said, "but they don't break." She looked up at me. "I get it," she said softly. We kept walking. At the back of the garden, near the old maple Henry planted in '81, I stopped. This, I said, was his favorite spot. Not the house, not the porch. Here. He said the wind sounded different through this tree. Catherine touched the bark. Did he ever want to move? Once, I said. Briefly, after the company sold. He thought maybe Florida, or out west. But I told him I didn't want to die somewhere that didn't know my name. And what did he say? He said, "Then we stay." She smiled, and for a moment her face carried a piece of his, the same thoughtful quiet, the same way of looking not at something, but through it. We sat on the old bench nearby, the one Henry had built before his hands started to shake. It creaked, but held. "Are you lonely?" she asked after a long pause. I shook my head. "Not today. And before today? I was alone," I said. "But not lonely. The difference is subtle. One is a condition. The other is a decision." She leaned back. "That makes sense." The wind picked up slightly. Leaves rustled, even though most were long gone. The tree still found ways to speak. "I always liked being here," she said. "Even when I was little and didn't understand why everyone was so tense around you." "Because I didn't perform softness," I said. "I didn't apologize for being clear." She turned toward me. "I never thought you were cold." "That's because you didn't need me to explain who I was." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "I brought something," she said, a little embarrassed. I took it gently, opened it. Inside was a photograph. Henry standing beside the tree, a rake in one hand, the other hand mid-wave. Someone had captured the moment without asking him to pose. "I found it in an old album Mom left in the attic," Catherine said. "I thought you should have it." I held the photo between both hands like something sacred. "He hated cameras," I said. But look at that. He's smiling. You made him smile like that, she said. I kept looking at the picture, not to remember him. I remembered him fine, but to see something new, the way his feet were angled, the way the light hit his shoulder. The little things we miss when we're still living the moment. Thank you, I said. We walked back to the house slowly. No rush, no reason to be anywhere else. Inside, she helped me prepare lunch. Nothing special, just lentil soup and toasted bread. She grated the cheese wrong, but I didn't say anything. I liked the way she filled the room without trying to. We ate in silence again, but this time it was full, not empty. Afterward, she washed the dishes even though I told her not to. Then she dried her hands and looked around like she was committing it all to memory. I think I'll come next Sunday too, she said. If that's okay. It is, I said. She put on her coat. The sleeves were too long. She'd bought it secondhand, I could tell. It didn't fit perfectly, but she made it hers. At the door, she turned once more. I'm proud of you, she said. I know I don't get to say that, but I am. You do, I replied. You just did. When the door closed behind her, I didn't feel the room shrink. I felt it settle. I went back to the photograph and placed it on the mantel. Not with ceremony, just placement. He belonged there. I made more tea, sat by the window. And I smiled. Not because something had been won, or fixed, or justified, but because something had simply been right. Finally. Spring came late that year. The tulips were slow, the birds cautious, as if even the weather had learned to wait before trusting again. But eventually, it arrived. Not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty. The way change always does when it's real. I didn't change the house, didn't renovate, didn't redecorate. But something in the way it held me now felt different. Not softer, just clearer. Like it had remembered what it was built for. Not to impress, not to host, not even to pass down. But to hold a life fully lived. I moved slower now, but not because of age. Because I no longer rushed to fill the silence with purpose. The purpose was already here. In the light through the window at noon, in the sound of the kettle beginning to hum, in the feeling of being alone and unafraid. Catherine came most Sundays, sometimes with tea, sometimes with nothing but time. We didn't always talk. Often we just sat. She'd read. I'd knit. Once she brought a radio and played old jazz records. Henry would have liked that. He always said brass instruments made the air feel thicker, like you had to listen with your whole body. Alan didn't write, didn't call. I wasn't waiting for it. Some distances remain because they're meant to, not out of hatred, just out of truth. Thelma, I heard, had joined a wellness retreat upstate. Yoga and raw food and something about energetic balance. I hoped it worked. I really did. People always ask when they find out, though gently, as if they're approaching a wound. Are you okay now? As if what happened was a phase. As if the storm passed, and now the roof has been patched and the furniture is dry again. But that's not how these things go. It wasn't a storm. It was erosion. Quiet. Repeated. Familiar. 1,000 small moments that tried to reshape who I was until I almost believed the version they were building for me. And then, one day, I didn't. That's all it took. Not rage, not vengeance, just refusal. Refusal to disappear while still breathing. Refusal to say thank you for being allowed to remain in my own name. Refusal to trade silence for belonging. I go to the garden now most mornings. The tulips came up fine, after all. The tree still stands, stronger even, since we trimmed the dying limbs. Catherine helped me plant new herbs near the back fence. Rosemary, thyme, a little sage. I don't cook as much as I used to, but it comforts me to smell them when I walk by. I framed a second photo of Henry, the one Catherine found, where he's waving. I put it in the hallway, just before the kitchen. I pass it 10 times a day, and each time I nod. Not out of habit, out of agreement. He would have understood. He always did. And the voice in my head, the one they tried to quiet. That voice came back. It never left entirely, but now it's louder. Not aggressive, just clear. I hear it when I pour tea, when I lock the door at night, when I stand by the window and remember that I built this life with my hands, my choices, my time, and no one has the right to rewrite that story without my permission. If you're still reading, if any of this has touched something quiet inside you, I'll tell you this: don't let them shrink you. Not the family that forgets what you gave, not the voices that call your strength difficult, not the world that pretends age is erasure. Don't wait for permission to matter. You already do. And when they come, if they come, with smiles and plans and words like just helping, ask one question: helping who? Then speak, then act, then remain. You don't owe them softness that costs you your shape. You don't owe them silence. What you owe is to yourself, to stay whole.